I noticed in the comment thread inside the Facebook group that some of you guys were almost taking the examples that I was sharing with you literally and not looking at the application itself. So I want to remind you, because I don't want to see anybody lose any business in this group whatsoever, is to remind you to not go past the sale. So when the client says yes to your terms, stop. Just stop right there. I read in one comment, somebody said, they agreed to my pricing, and I said, no, you need a comparison shop. I was like, what? Not when they say yes to your price and your terms. That's it. So stop, have the closing conversation, and send an invoice. Don't do any more to muck it up. And to illustrate this point, I want to share a story with you from Jordan Belfort himself, the Wolf of Wall Street, also known for selling a process called straight line selling. And in this story, Jordan Belfort talks about going to the Mercedes dealership. He said he's ready to buy. This is back when he was making a ton of money. He just wanted to walk in and buy top of line S-Class Mercedes. So when he came in and said, I want to buy this S-Class Mercedes, the salesperson said, but did you know it had this feature and that feature, and it has this kind of safety mechanism, et cetera, et cetera. And after a while, he grew frustrated and he just walked out. He decided to take his business to the BMW dealership. He goes to the BMW dealership and says, I want to buy this car right now. The guy said, great, let's get the paperwork started. So they sit down. He's like, this is how it's supposed to be. They sit down and he noticed some pictures behind the salesperson, and he was just making polite conversation. He's like, oh, so your kids are into sports and baseball, I see. And then the person stopped the whole transaction and started talking about baseball and his kids and going on and on and on. He got tired of that. He walked out of that dealership. Finally, he goes to the Porsche dealership. He says, I want to buy that car. And within 30 minutes, the deal was done. He drove off with his new Porsche. So this is just a reminder, you guys. I share lots of stories, anecdotal stories, to help you guys understand something. It's up to you then to look at the context in which you're in and make sure you match the advice with the problem that you have, okay? Whatever you do, please do not go past the sale. It's one of the cardinal sins. Do not do that. I want to remind you too, before we dive in today, about your mindset, that you're going to be positive, optimistic, helpful. You're going to act as a fiduciary, and what you're going to do is going to be fair for both parties, not for yourself nor for the client, but for both parties. And you're going to remain unbiased and neutral. Okay. Remember that when we're talking to any prospect, whether we're in the bidding process or not, there are many possible outcomes. Hiring is just one of them. You need to remember that during the entire process, you're just determining fit. Is there a problem that you can solve? Is the problem valuable enough for you to solve? Is it something that you want to do? If not, this is not a good fit. You did not lose that client because that client was never meant for you. Business Bootcamp Week 5 pricing strategies. The goal today is to help you evolve from thinking like a freelancer, which is how many of us start. We want to remove the mystery behind pricing, provide you with strategies and tools so you can charge more. So here we go. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I started a company called Blind in 1995. I was making that transition from being a freelancer to a studio, and I had a lot of bad habits. The habits were I mostly sold time in which I actually worked physically in somebody's office. I took their direction using their machines. And so when it was time to go off on my own, which I felt like this is the moment, I didn't know how to construct bids. And so when a client asked me for a bid or an estimate, it became a situation where I was really nervous. I didn't know what to do. And here are some of the things that I wound up doing. These may sound very familiar to you because chances are you're doing something very similar. Okay, I was accustomed selling time, and all this, when they asked me for an estimate, was really based on a gut feeling, framed around what I thought was the fair market value of time and materials. The scope was never clear, nor the deliverables. And I would start to do that negative self-talk and negotiate myself down. I would say a number in my head and think, oh my gosh, that's too high. There's no way I could do this as a freelancer. And if I did the math, that works out to be $4,000 a day. And nobody in their right mind would pay me $4,000 a day. So I kept negotiating my rates down before even presenting them to the client. And what I was doing ultimately was, because I had no sense of their budget, I was bidding in the dark. And that made me really anxious and nervous. It didn't factor in also profit. I thought I was being profitable. Really what I was just working as was a freelancer, an overglorified freelancer calling himself a business. And I wasn't thinking about the invisible expenses like project management, coordination, etc. So needless to say, this was very stressful and very time consuming, so much so that I dreaded doing bids. So a new client would call, I would just drag my feet. And it felt to me a lot of times it was like chasing a cloud or trying to wrap your hand around something that was never there. Unfortunately, after submitting a bid, sometimes the clients would not call me back. It made me even further second guess myself. Was I too high? Was I too low? What happened? The conversation just ended abruptly. And I had my breakthrough moment. And the breakthrough moment came to me in the form of a human being. For some reason, I can't remember how it is that I was fortunate enough to meet a producer who had many years of experience working in the industry that I was in. And he decided to help me on a bid. And this is when everything changed. He showed me how to bid a project properly. He asked me a few questions, and each question blew my mind. And each time after he asked me the question, I was thinking to myself, I did not know we could charge for that. So where was it that I learned the rules to do bidding that this seemed so foreign to me? And I think when I searched inside of myself, I came to the realization that nobody had taught me these things. I taught these things to myself. And so there are a lot of bad habits that we pick up along the way, even by just absorbing other people's information without them actively teaching us. But I saw the light. Another thing that is historic or classic of creative people is that they tend to underestimate time. You underestimate your time, hence the people that work for you underestimate their time. So as a general rule, you should at least double the time in which you estimate. So if you ask an artist, how long will it take you to model something? If they say 2 days, put 4 days worth of time in there, at least. So some people say 1.5 times to 3 times. I just go with 2x it, and you should be okay. So here's the bidding overview and what we're going to focus on today, okay? There are 3 types of bidding. First one is called inputs, and that's based on time and materials. It's an estimate because basically if you spend more time, the estimate will go higher. And if you spend less time, the estimate will go lower, meaning you'll charge less or more depending on how much time you actually use. There is an inherent benefit and risk to this. The risk is to the client. They assume the risk because they don't have any price certainty. And there's benefits to you in that, you know what, change it 1,000,000 times, I don't care, because we could work on this for 6 months and I'm going to get paid no matter what. And so it's a safe way to do business. I know a very large they call it, pre-visualization company. They have 500 employees throughout the world, and they're basically doing an estimate. They're selling time. It means slow, steady growth. It also means they don't ever go bankrupt, which is pretty incredible in itself. So I'm not here to judge, to tell you which one is the right one. You just need to find the right fit for you. This is like a game of Goldilocks, right? Which porridge matches what your tastes are. And so the example here is that when you submit a bid, it's only an estimate, and it's going to have plus and minus. That's why the $100,000 is there. So $100,000 give or take. Next one is called pricing based on outputs. So now we're not going to talk about time and materials anymore, because what the client recognizes is they're taking on unnecessary price uncertainty, and they want you to submit a fixed bid. So in a fixed bid, we really need to focus on what the deliverables are. And the warning here is if you don't have clearly defined deliverables, you're open to a lot of interpretation. This is why the VFX business is a tricky business to be in, because they're bidding on jobs where the shot's not even defined, done is not defined. So basically the studio and then hence the director can make as many changes as they want. They can re-architect the entire scene with no penalty because none of that was defined beforehand. So that's the problem there. So the client now has the benefit of price certainty, and they're willing to pay a percentage above an input-based bid. But for you, unfortunately, you assume the risk. There are some benefits to you as well. This is one way that you can scale your company really quickly, because in this model, you're rewarded for being really efficient. So if you run your project faster, if you use cheaper labor, for example, we use a bunch of interns to do the work with us. So we manage and coach them up. So we don't pay the interns that much money. So the difference between what it costs us and what we sold it for, what another normal person could do it for, is where we benefit. And so you're able to grow your company quite quickly. So in this example here, we're looking at the same type of project. So we're going to say it's $100,000, and then we're going to put in a little padding, some buffer, if you will, for the uncertainty in terms of client changes, etc. And it's going to be somewhere between 30 to 80%. So the bid would come in at 130 on the low end and 180,000 on the high end. Now you can see the obvious benefit to this way of working. All right. Now, you might be asking, how do you get it to be on the higher end of the 80%? We'll talk about that later. Lastly, and perhaps the most difficult one to pull off, and the one we all want, it's such a hot way of talking about bidding right now, and that there are companies, coaches, strategists trying to teach you, the creative person, how to do this. And we're going to get into it. It's called value-based pricing. And there's some simple mechanisms to make value-based pricing work. One is we need to talk about the desired future state. We need to define what success metrics or the metrics of success look like. And it's based on the value you create for the client and reaping some fair share of that to achieve the double thank you. They thank you for growing their business. You thank you for them paying you a fair share, a percentage of the gains that you were able to create. So in this case here, we disregard time and materials. We disregard all kinds of inputs on our end. And we just look at the value being created for the client. So if we create $1 million worth of potential new revenue for the client, most consultants charge somewhere around 20% of value gained in the first year. So that's your baseline. And that 20% serves also as an anchor, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Okay. And what we do is then we say, well, if we charge you $1 million to make $1 million, then you've broken even. But we would have to provide a lot of assurances and guarantees that you're going to make $1 million more than you did this year. So what we do is we call that discounting for uncertainty. And some percentage between 10 and 100% is the right number. And that depends on your client, how much risk they want to take on. The lower the percentage in terms of your bills, the higher the risk. Okay, the higher percentage of your fees, the lower the risk, up until the point of a money-back guarantee. Some differences here is typically when you're doing inputs and outputs, you're working with an intermediary, probably an agency or studio. And chances are some of you guys are working client direct and wondering, what the heck am I doing? Why am I still pricing it this way? Well, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because we're going to teach you today how to maximize even pricing based on inputs. Now, when you're pricing based on value, this is client direct. Generally speaking, you have to work with a senior decision maker. It doesn't have to be the owner or founder, but it's somebody who has to be able to realize the value of the thing that you're doing. Otherwise, talking about value is not going to matter to them at all, because they have no idea. They have no visibility or transparency on the company's finances, and they're not empowered to make those decisions. So let's get into it. So this is section 2, pricing inputs, and this is how it works. Pricing inputs is an estimate based on time and materials. We typically reference previous jobs or our own experience with similar deliverables, and we adjust accordingly. After we complete each job, we should run actuals, which is to measure against the estimated time versus the time that we spent to make adjustments next time, so that our bidding gets more and more accurate over time. You know an experienced vendor because they're able to quote you pretty quickly the price and be fairly accurate within a margin of 10%, a margin of error of 10%. Okay, and this is how we need to do this. So if we're going to charge based on inputs, let's do this the right way. Now, I dug up this estimate. This is not my estimate, but it was one that was sent to me. And as you guys can see here, it has the bones of a input-based estimate. And you can see there, it breaks down every phase of engagement, and it gives it a title and the estimated time to accomplish each task. Now notice there at the bottom, the total time it's written in parentheses, is approximate. So they approximate that it's going to take 104 hours to do whatever it is that they want us to do. So this is some kind of packaging assignment here. And then the total approximate value or the budget of that is $6,760 based on a $65 hourly rate. So how do we master the input estimate? Now, here are some things that I know about the input-based estimate. We know the start and delivery date. We know the general scope and deliverables, and it feels familiar to something we've done before. And typically, the way that you do this is in a waterfall style project management. And don't worry about what that means. I'll explain later, okay? So the way I learned how to do this and the way I'm going to share with you, and this is worthwhile for everybody that's in the first two categories of pricing inputs and pricing outputs, okay, is typically you just print out a calendar, and it's easy to do with pencil and paper because you need to move things around. If you're a digital person and you like Google Calendar or iCal or something like that, or any one of those software, then use one of those apps. It's totally fine. So what we need to do is figure out a calendar and a bid, okay? And the way that I want to teach you how to do this and the way I know how to do it is to chunk. Take the project, and projects are rather unwieldy when looked at in its totality. So chunking is just breaking it up into smaller bite-sized pieces. Other people describe this as onion skinning, which is take it in its broadest sense and just peel away the parts until you get to the core, okay? And typically speaking, 3 to 5 phases or key milestones make the most sense for me. So for a motion graphics project, it could be storyboard and keyframes, a rough edit, animatics, a first pass animation, finish animation, and final color grading. So those are 5 key milestones. For a web-based project, it could be information architecture and a sitemap, along with content architecture, wireframe, visual design, development, and QA quality assurance. So for video projects, it could be a script, a shot list with storyboards, shoot, edit, and everything that involves in post-production. So this is kind of what it looks like, all right? So we know when the project theoretically awards, because we should ask that on the first call. When do you anticipate awarding this project? Not necessarily the start date, but when do you anticipate awarding? And when does this need to deliver? And how much flexibility is there in the delivery date? Now, some things have a hard deadline, and you need to know that up front. Meaning, somebody's going to step on stage and play a video that you make, that needs to be ready on the 31st. Or if it's, we just need this in hand because we need to do some testing prior to the event happening. So their deadline could be a week or 2 weeks out of the actual event, which gives you some flexibility. So here's a tip for you. If that's the case and you're running behind, it is possible to do a running delivery where you deliver them something for them to do testing on stage, and 2 to 3 days out, you can actually finish the final thing and just swap out the exact same file with the exact same timing. And that's usually acceptable. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that when you receive the first payment is when you actually start to take the project seriously. Now, it's wonderful for the client to say, I love you, we intend to award you this project, but until you receive check in hand, and I say check because checks are important here, or a wire transfer, when you receive that, then you book the team and then you plan accordingly. Until then, you're just putting everybody on hold, okay? Now, the reason why I say check or wire transfer is because some of you are accepting electronic payment, and most forms of electronic payment, like credit cards, PayPal, things like that, Venmo, have dispute resolution where and credit card, where the bank always side with the person paying. So they'll freeze the money and they'll take it and they will do no dispute resolution. So be very, very careful accepting credit card, PayPal, or anything else like that, because the dispute resolution process is horrific. You're just going to lose the money. So get it in check or wire transfer, or something that's where at least they can't just automatically take the money away from you. All right. So once you receive the first payment, you can start mapping this thing out. So what I work backwards from milestones. That's why I talked about milestones. So historically speaking, there are 3 to 5 major milestones, and you just put those in the calendar depending on how you work. Typically speaking, each milestone gets shorter and shorter as you go. The design, the thinking, the strategy, the UX, the whole thing, it happens all up front, the research. And that's why the first payment also is typically 50%. All the thinking, all the brain power, all your experience is going to be felt up front. So that's what we do. We map out the milestone. So we go to milestone 2, and then we go to milestone, oh, my animation's off, 3. Each one has a check-in point, and we allow for the clients to be able to route the material internally to get consolidated feedback from everyone. And we also ask that that is the case in the terms and assumptions, that we have a single point of contact. That's called a SPOC, a single point of contact, okay? Then once the feedback's been consolidated, it's then rerouted back to us, and then we go into the next waterfall, basically. So 8 starts off with design. The second milestone could be animation, and then finish compositing or color correction could be the third milestone. And then what we do is we internally and externally, we have a delivery date that's a few days prior to the actual drop dead deadline. And that's to ensure everybody signs off. There are no last minute additions or changes that then turn our world upside down. So that's kind of what it looks like. Then we go to deliver. Now, once you know that, you can literally count days. So from the 7th to the 16th, that's how many days we can work on that project, right? So that's 5 plus 3. That's basically 8 days. So if you're charging $1,000 a day against 8 days, then one would assume you would put in the bid $8,000. But I'm going to get a little bit more into that, in that you can charge in multiples of people. So even if it's just you working on it, you can charge 2 or 3 people working on it for 8 days if you want, and show in the bid 24 days worth of work. The reason being is if it's a heavy project that requires a modeler, a texture artist, or somebody else to do the work, then you would be able to charge for that. And that's how you build your estimate. Once you build your estimate properly, the way that I'm going to show you, you're going to realize you probably have been grossly underbidding your project. Okay, so here it is in bullet point form. The project awards, the client signs the contract and issues a purchase order, or PO. Using the purchase order, you're able to send it to the accounting department to then pay, because accounting departments will hold up your invoice without a purchase order number. Okay, then you go through your client onboarding process. We'll talk about more about this in the next module, module 6. Ben Burns will share with us what the best practices are in terms of onboarding. We're going to invoice the client, and we're going to make it explicitly clear to them that we don't start booking teams until we receive the check. So if the deadline is immovable, it's best for them, it's prudent for them to expedite payment, because you will not book any team members. But what you will do right now is you'll put your freelance team on hold. Now, many of us work in some combination of having staff, people that we pay an annual salary to, and then we will bring on freelancers to help us out. So at this point, you put the team on hold, you prep your resources, computer, software, etc. You get everything lined up, and we're waiting for that check to arrive. When that check arrives and it clears, we book the team and we move forward. We also need to know that that first payment, the 50%, is non-refundable. Okay, and there's a little asterisk next to that, because in some instances, the clients will say, we approved it, we sent you the check, but before we got started, something happened on our client end, and we have to kill the project. Then you could do a kill fee. And what percentage of the kill fee you want to charge, that's up to you. You're entitled to 100% of that first payment, or what I would do is the fair thing to do is give some of that money back, pay some of that to the freelancers that I booked, and then cancel them. That seems to be fair. All right, but that's up to you. But do not give back the entire amount. That was the whole point of sending you the check in the first place. It's non-refundable. Okay, when we're talking about milestone 1, 2, and 3, what we need to do is determine the team member roles needed for each milestone. And what you'll realize here, there are a lot more hands involved in producing a project than you think, because you, the sole proprietor or the entrepreneur who created this company, typically can do all roles that you think that that's the job of one person. What we need to do is break you apart into lots of different roles and staff them accordingly to run the project properly. So you may serve as the creative director or the VFX supervisor, but you'll see that there are a lot more roles here. There's an art director, senior designer, animator, editor, 3D artist, so on and so forth. There's quite a few people that you're going to need, or at least roles, to fulfill the job, to be able to deliver on this project. So that's going to be the thing that's going to hopefully start to unravel in the way that you think about looking at bids, versus you doing all the work and having a singular role versus having multiple people work on it. Okay? And typically what you need to do then is, now you know the roles, to determine the fair market value for the rates for each role. What are they? And what I would do is, I would say on average, we're going to pick the senior level person that fulfills that role. For example, I don't want to get a junior creative director. I don't want to get a super seasoned, expensive creative director. Somebody on the upper end, that price seems to be where I want to be. That way I have a lot of latitude and flexibility to hire who I want. Now I can always hire the best in the world, but I can hire a pretty good person. So I would put them in the B plus to A minus range, not necessarily the A plus. And that's room for you to make some money as well, okay? You need to also define some variables, like is this gonna require original photography, illustration, 3D modeling, etc. And then you kind of factor in for that as well. Are there other expenses, miscellaneous expenses? And we'll show you in detail what this looks like: archiving, doing research, purchasing fonts on behalf of your clients, stock images, working meals. I didn't even know for a while that you could actually charge for the meals, especially if the project has a hairy deadline. So if you're going to work through dinner and lunch because it's a tight project, those need to be charged back to the client. And any consumables you use. So if you're doing a lot of printing, mock-ups or anything, charge for that. And lastly, last but not least, you have to determine the profit margin. This is a concept that blew my mind away because I thought I'm working on the project, there's money, I'm getting paid, all of that's profit. That's not considered profit at all. If you were to remove yourself from actually working in your business and you paid everybody the rate that they were due for the work that they did, what's outside of that is what you would consider profit. Now, if you fulfill some of these roles, that's just a bonus on top. So you need to determine what a fair profit margin is. Now, back in the day when times were booming, I could literally put in 40% profit margin and show the client. It's not buried anywhere. It says 40% markup, and they would just approve it because all they were doing were looking at the final number, and if the final number was palatable to them, they would approve it. I hope you guys understand that. Okay, so some scheduling tips here, okay? I mentioned this before already. You want to factor time for internal client feedback. 24 to 48 hours seems to work. Sometimes it isn't realistic, but you should ask your client, what is a realistic amount of time that you need to circulate this internally to give us clear and concise feedback that's consolidated? And if they say 48 hours, you say, okay, great. I'm going to build that into the schedule. So if you use more than 24 or 48 hours, whatever you agree to, first of all, your project will be delayed and you will have cost overruns. I need you to be aware of that. They say, okay, Chris, make it 60 hours. You're great. Well, that's going to reflect in the budget too, because I can't have a team idling, waiting for feedback. They're dedicated to this project specifically. So it's in everybody's benefit to keep this as tight as possible. They're great. Well, let's keep it at 24 hours. And would that help? Absolutely. Here's another scheduling tip is that you may want to produce 2 calendars, an internal and external calendar, and so that you can manage the client's expectations as well as your team. You may short your team a day to give yourself a little wiggle room in case the work is coming back and it's not quite hitting the bar that you set. And then what I would do also is externally, I would show fewer milestones if you can get away with it. Internally, have more milestones. So more check-in points and a shorter time, a shorter sprint, if you will, between milestones. And that way you have a little bit of flexibility. And that's very important for your own sanity. So let's take a look at an example here. And it's going to get really granular, you guys. So hopefully you guys are all fresh and awake this morning, okay? So this is a bid form we will provide to you. It's a modified AICE bid form, Association of Independent Commercial Editors. We modified it for motion design and post-production. And it is essentially, I think, a 4-page bid form, 4 or 5 page. This is the top sheet. This is a summary, and it looks something like this. You'll notice a couple of things in here. One is that we charge for creative and production supervision. This is key. Most of you guys are not putting this in if you're pricing inputs. You're not including supervision time. You're not including time that's going to take to talk to the clients. So you can put that in there. Okay. And once you put in all the categories, the spreadsheet automatically tallies it up onto the cover page. So you don't have to do any math. There's very low risk of you getting this thing wrong because it's all calculation based. Then you come up with a subtotal. Now, most people would just submit that and say, that's it. That's the price. Well, no, that's not the price because we need to include the profit margin. So you see that 25% there, it says production fee. You can call it production fee. You can call it profit margin. You can call it whatever you want. In construction, profit margin might be 10 to 15%. In interior design, it might be as much as 25%. that's put in there, that's a generally accepted form of doing business. Businesses have to make a profit to sustain itself. And so then that becomes your grand total. Okay, so here's the second page to this bid form, even though it says page 1 or page 3 at the bottom if you look at it. Now you can see all the different categories that make up the bid form. So you can see areas A, B, and C. They coordinate or tie into the front page, the summary sheet, A, B, C, and D, so they can look at all this stuff. Now the bid form that we give you is quite sophisticated in that it hides all the rates unless you populate it with a quantity. So right now the rates all say 0 unless there's a number in front of it. You'll see that there's a column in here where there's a really weird error. It's because I converted it from Excel to numbers because I don't have Excel on this computer at home. And that's what it looks like. But this is a really cool bid form. It used to show all our numbers, and I didn't want that because I didn't want clients to see what the rates were because I don't want them to compare things that don't exist right now. So another thing that you're going to see here, okay, so there's a producer, or AKA a project manager. There's you potentially, a creative director or somebody that replaces you. And the idea is that you need to budget the project as if you weren't in it at all. If you were a traditional CEO, you cannot touch the work. You need to put in a body for every role that needs to be accomplished to be able to complete the task. So art director, designer. And now down there, you can see that there's actually a workstation that corresponds to the designer that's working on the project. So that was another thing that blew my mind. It's like, I didn't know I could charge for that. Yeah, basically, if you didn't have any computers to work with, you'd have to rent them. And you can call up local computer service companies and ask them, what is it to rent a workstation? Spec to the one that you've got or something very similar to it. And then you can put that in there. So there's lots of ways to increase your budget. And then you start to realize if you don't include this, then you're probably losing money and not as profitable as you think you are. And that's why your runway is so tight. Another thing that we like to include in there is to search for stock photography, something that we don't necessarily charge for in the past. And now we realize how much time it takes, because in lieu of hiring a photographer who does most of the work, we're going to save a client money by buying cheap stock photography. We don't have to deal with licensing, and the images are much cheaper, but we have to swap that out for spending time looking for the right image and curating. So there should be an amount in there as well. And then lastly, if there's any kind of still photography assets, what do they cost? And you can put that in there. Now, you don't have to put in the actual cost. You need to just put in what the fair market value of that is. So if you purchase a stock library, for example, a subscription that you say pay $300 a month for, and it gives you hundreds of images, well, then the images might be worth only $3 per image. But if somebody had to go out and buy a single image without having a subscription plan, what would that cost them? Well, it might cost them $50 an image, and that's what you charge. Because the rest of the times you're carrying the cost of having that subscription that you're not being reimbursed for. Whew, hope your brains are not melted yet. All right, so this is a closer look because I realize my screen share might be too wide for you, and now we can dive in deeper here. So you can see that the grand total for this estimate, whatever this job was $63,838. And this is typically why when you hear me talk, when we're doing a video project, that I say that we can't touch projects that are less than 50K. Because when you bid it properly, it's very hard to have a number in there that's less than 50K without showing like 3 days of work. Very, very difficult, okay? And the bid form that we give you actually has the actuals, and it will calculate the variance for you automatically. So once you type in what you actually spent on previs or film production or whatever it is, it'll show you the variance. So over time, hopefully, you come under, but not over in terms of your estimate. Okay, now theoretically, since we're pricing inputs, it doesn't matter what you put in here, except for the fact that you want to be pretty accurate, because if you wind up spending more time in editorial or something else, you would just ding the client for that. So here it is. You can see with producer, creative director, etc.
See, Chris, for me, I remember back in the day, I always thought charging by time, the clock would start as soon as Illustrator loads, like after the load screen and I got the artboard open. Yeah, and then boom, sense. now the clock is running. So seeing
only when you're actually working.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So seeing all this stuff was for me, it was just mind blowing because I realized that I could be charging for client calls and reviews and project management and all this other stuff that was dedicated to their project, but I just wasn't charging for.
Right. It seemed like that was the ethical thing to do, but the only thing you were doing is you're cheating yourself, because if you're working for a client, let's say you work on something for 5 hours, what good are you the rest of that day? How often can you switch gears without losing track of where you are? So as we're making the transition from being a freelancer to an agency or design studio, we need to get out of that freelancer mindset. And this is why, Ben, you and I have had debates online about the word freelancer. The freelancer sells their time. And you're right. When you show up to work, if you take a 4-hour lunch, it's not fair for you to charge your client that, whoever booked you. They would throw you out, essentially, if you did that. But when you're a studio, you're working almost on a project basis, so you can't take on additional work. That's the theory. You're not supposed to take on additional work, and then you're dedicating yourself and your team. So we're going to look at it in terms of blocks of time. And we're going to work on day rates, not hourly rates. There are some exceptions as to when you charge hourly. For when it needs to be super granular, then you would charge hourly. Like you can see there in line item 26 and 27, there's hours for rendering. That's an arbitrary number because there's no way we would know that ahead of time. We would just assume a heavy 3D job is going to have hours of rendering, and we're going to put in, say, 117 hours or whatever the number is going to be. So there's an editor, an assistant editor, etc. So there's a lot, and there's even time that we put in there for transcoding the media, and that used to be a thing. It's not so much a thing anymore, but if you're working with Final Cut, you need to transcode the media from the original camera format, whatever it is, Red Raw, so that it's more editable, because otherwise your machine is going to grind through this thing. We can charge for archiving the project. The bigger the project, the longer time it's going to take, the more time it's going to take for us to archive the project. And here's a hot tip. I don't want to forget about this. Typically in our terms and conditions now, we say that we only keep the project archived and active for 3 months after the project delivers. We're not responsible for the project after that. So before, we used to sweat this kind of stuff because if our drives were damaged somehow, there's an error, 2-4 years later, the clients could call us up and say, we need to make that one change to this file. And A, good luck finding it. B, I hope the drives are okay. So now we don't want to take on the burden of responsibility that we need to maintain the archive in perpetuity. So we say that we only keep the files for 3 months because we purge the drives afterwards. If they wish to purchase the archive from us or wish for us to archive it especially for them, there's a fee for that, and you charge for that. I mentioned before the meals that's in there. Even conference calls, because sometimes when you set up those group conference calls, it costs you per minute to do that. So you just make an assumption it's going to be 8 calls. That doesn't need to be accurate, just put it in there. So there's money coming in all over the place. How many meals? Just put something in there. All right. Now, when you do a detailed bid like this, the pricing formula is quite transparent. They're also able to comparison shop you to the next person, and that's okay. They want to be able to see apples to apples. And your approach is going to be a little different, so the numbers won't line up exactly. For example, if you're primarily a 2D animation shop and somebody else is a 3D animation shop, there's many different ways to solve the problem. So yours is going to be loaded with lots of labor with cell animators, and theirs are going to be loaded with modelers, character riggers, technical directors, etc. So they won't be able to exactly compare. So what you want to do is you should ask the client if they work with a cost consultant. Now, the cost consultant's only job is to reduce the budget. What they do is they get a percentage of the money they save the client. So if they're able to pull $20,000 out from your bid, they get a percentage of that. Let's say 25%. So they're going to make $5,000 by pulling 20K. So you can see they're going to go in there and they're going to challenge a lot of your bid. So what I typically do is if it's the first time working with a particular agency, this happens a lot with agencies, is I'm going to ask them, are you working with a cost consultant? What do they typically flag? What is not considered acceptable? And we don't want to go through this process and cut things out. It wastes a lot of time. And you can even lean into the client and say that. And then I'm going to say, okay, look, they won't accept markup. So what you do is you redistribute the markup and you bake it into the rates. So if you wind up with a bid that's $63,000, all you do is change your rates or the days in there to be higher. So it works out to be $63,000 showing no markup. And that's an informal agreement, a kind of a sidebar conversation you have with your client so they actually know what's going on. Because if they like you and they want to work with you, they don't want to slow the process down. So what you need to do is be able to anticipate and adjust this accordingly, and to make a note internally when you're ever working with XYZ agency to never show markup. And they don't accept the art director's role or whatever it is. And there's always a couple of things that they don't like. They don't pay pension and welfare, etc. So you know those flags, anticipate them, and adjust the bid before the cost consultants see it. Okay, so what did we learn here? You need to charge a lot more for a lot of things that you're doing that you're not currently doing right now. You need to charge for creative supervision, for project management, for art direction. You can include multiple team members because that's what's going to be required for the job. For example, if you work really fast, if honestly you're 3 times as fast as other people, I would put in 3 people in the bid in the event that you don't want to do the work. And if you do the work, then you realize the gains there, okay? Machine rentals, render times. Now, if you're doing a purely input bid, somebody might say, well, this is not fair, and it's true. So then what you can do then is you can just change your rate to be really high and only put in the time that you use. Theoretically, that's how that's supposed to work, all right? But I'm getting ahead of myself because we do some kind of hybrid version of this. But most of all, include profit margin. You need to define the assumptions. What's the client responsible for? What are you responsible for? What are the kill fees, like I mentioned before? What are the payment terms? We like 50, 25, 25. 50% upfront, 25% past major milestones, and the last 25% net 15 days upon delivery. Now, some people who don't trust clients, who have a history of people ripping them off, say the remainder 25% is due upon delivery. The files, the site, none of it will be handed over unless the check is in hand. You need to define your hours of operation, which are pretty standard. Hours are from 10 to 7, Monday through Friday. So they don't look at us on Saturday and say, why aren't you guys working? You see the hours of operation? There it is. And if you're going to work overtime, you charge rush fees. There's project delay fees, and make sure that there's feedback cycles that are very clear. So pricing outputs is really based on deliverables, what you give to the client. And these are also known as fixed fee bid, and it provides price certainty to the client, and you assume the risk, barring any client mandated changes that fall out of scope. This is when you get into overages, okay? What we want to do in mastering the output bid is, here's some of the key things that we need to know. We still need to know the start and delivery date. Now we need to clearly define, not just have a loose definition of scope and deliverables, because that's what you're bidding on. This becomes a challenge in itself, and we'll talk about that later. So now we're going to start to figure out some things, and we're going to use price bracketing, where we anchor high, and we're padding the bid for uncertainty. When now what we want to do is obfuscate the time and materials, because this is where if we're guaranteeing the results, the deliverables, then we don't want to show them how we got there, because it's not even a point of discussion. And this is how we defeat the cost consultants, because the bid is completely opaque. It's just a number. And typically speaking, what we want to do is back into a number based on what we said to the client, what was spoken. The easiest approach here is to calculate your inputs and to pad and account for uncertainty. Like I said before, we recommend somewhere between 30 to 85% on top of the inputs bid. So this is a graduated process. So in the very beginning, you're a freelancer, and then you graduate to becoming an agency or studio yourself. In doing so, now you're managing multiple people, and you're removing yourself from doing the work and purely on an executive level. Now, when you transition to this type of thing, you can still use that spreadsheet that we've shared with you. And then what you need to do is you need to price that up. You need to price that up. So the range is, and it's wild that it could be between 30 to 85%. Then the client knows that you mark it up, because there's going to be a range of options, and you're going to estimate on the high side. And so somewhere in there is the price. Now, they don't need to know how you got to this formula. That's not important. So if you're coming in and thinking that the project's $100,000, so pricing for uncertainty on your end, assuming the risk, you might come in at $165,000 and submit that to the client. Just as a reminder, from the diagnosing module, I think that's module 3, you need to say a price, before you show a price. This is critical. This is very critical. And what you say is the proposal. This is from Blair Ann's Pricing Creativity book. The proposal is just a backup of what you said. This is very, very important, okay? Because we're going to back into this number. And I'll show you how it's done, okay? Hopefully you guys aren't confused yet. So the first approach, let me bring that slide back up so it's clear to you guys. The first approach is to calculate your inputs and pad and then float that number. So you know, kind of like when you're talking to the client, yeah, it feels like that job we did for Dunkin' Donuts or Honda. It feels really close to that one. And we remember when we were pricing based on input, it came in about 100K. So we're going to tell the clients 150K and see what they say. Okay. We also remember that we need to practice the principle of anchoring. And you need to anchor above where you expect the client to spend. That's the whole point of anchoring. So if you're going to ask for 100, if you know you want 100, you need to ask for 150. If you want 150, you need to ask for 200. And oddly enough, there's no penalty for asking for too high. Actually, the higher the anchor, the higher your general final price is going to be. And just as a quick refresher, anchoring is a form of heuristics, which is a mental shortcut. What we're doing is we're priming the thought process around the first piece of information given. And that's why we want to say the price first whenever possible. And we want to anchor high. So this is where a lot of us run into trouble and we feel uneasy. Maybe you don't lack maybe you lack the confidence or self-esteem to pull this thing off. So I have a couple other tools to introduce to you in case you're not familiar with them already. And let's say that you need to get the budget out there. One way to talk about the budget is to say in general orders of magnitude. It's called a GOM. General orders of magnitude. Is it 1000x, 100x, 10x, or 1x? So what kind of budget are we talking about here? Do you have $1 million to spend? Do you have $100,000 to spend? Or do you have $10,000 to spend on this? They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. We never said we had $1 million. We probably have 200K. Great. Let's start working with that. Okay. And some of you guys are already familiar with this term. It's called a WAG, or a scientific wild ass guess, a swag. And basically, you can also begin the conversation like that. And what you want to do is you want to reference some imaginary project or a real project that you've done before. So based on what we've discussed thus far, this is what you say to the client. Similar projects have cost between $300,000 to $150,000. Notice I started high. That's how we anchor. And the bottom of it is 150. And then we ask the client, does that budget range work for you? So I've already done the math in my head, right? Remember how I said it was going to be a $100,000 project, and then I account for uncertainty on my part, certain price certainty for the client. It's going to be 150. So I don't want to start with 150. I want to start with 300. This is called price bracketing. This is called anchoring high. This is what we're doing right now. And the reason why we ask, does that budget range work for you, is now we need to take the client's temperature, because the next rule is we must address any buyer resistance before proceeding with a bid. Now, when we ask them, how does this sound? Does this work for you? We need to be silent and we just need to listen. If they take a deep breath, they suck in wind, like, you hear that sound like they ate something spicy, there's a problem. If there's not an enthusiastic, emphatic, yes, Chris, this is going to work for us, I love it, I'm really excited about working with you, we need to address this. So this is where we can say, I noticed some hesitation, Mr. and Mrs. Client, from your reaction. Are you uncomfortable spending this amount? Like, yeah, I'm not. Then you can ask why or why not. Why aren't you comfortable spending this amount? Can you tell me why? Well, because we have to wait for our Q3 earnings report to come in, and then we can do this. Well, fantastic. Why don't we punt this conversation until you have your Q3 earnings? Okay, I could do that. An alternative to this is to ask them, what is more likely to get approved? Like, well, 300, that's a stretch for us, Chris, but 180, you can get something around 180, we could probably make that happen. So I'm hearing from you, if we're somewhere within plus or minus 20K of 180, you're good? Or is 180K the ceiling? Like, no, somewhere around there is good. Now I know. I've set the price before I showed the price. Then I go back and reverse engineer the whole thing, okay? Let's look at an example of what this looks like here. This is a really old 2-page bid, and it's not perfect, but you can see like how we do this. So we summarize their goals, and we're starting to dip into value-based pricing here because value-based pricing is very much in surfacing their goals. So we talk about, this is for like some micro website, I think, where we define it like there's infinite scrolling, and it delivers on October 29th, and the agency is called RAP. They have to supply all the information, architecture, wireframe, all that stuff, artwork to us. None of the bid includes that. So this is what it looks like, the second page, right? And then there's just a number. Notice there's no time and materials, there's nothing. It's just a number. And we spend time talking about the deliverables. Now, this isn't a great description, but it just shows you an example of what a description could look like. We try to spell it out, not in legal terms, but we try to put walls or boundaries around what we're going to do and the expectations of the client and us as well. So this is a microsite that we bid for $25K, and we did. Here's another one. And this one, we have this bid form for you as well. So this is the one we currently use. So a few years ago, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, I was tired of us breaking down time and materials and submitting as a firm bid, as a fixed bid, a pricing outputs bid. I said to my producers at that time who were doing all the budgets, why are we showing time and materials when we know, in fact, if we wind up spending more money in producing this project because we did a poor job of estimating time, the clients owe us no more money. I want you to change the bid so that they can no longer see what we put into it, just what we do for the work. I want you to spend all of your time describing what we're doing, almost like an attorney, and less time on trying to figure out the numbers that go into it. So then they asked me, Chris, well, what are we going to base the bid on? I said, well, since you're not as sophisticated in doing this value-based pricing or price bracketing, all I want you to do is think about an old project and add a percentage to it. And that's the number you're going to float to the client plus a higher number. You got that? Like, yes, we got it. So that's how they do it. And the counter argument to all this stuff is this, is that I said to them, because they were like so concerned about the accuracy of the bid, I said, you're being delusional right now. You're being delusional. I'm saying this to you right now, you, whoever's listening to this program right now, is that you're only fooling yourself that you could actually accurately bid something prior to scoping out every little part of the project. It's impossible for you to know at the beginning of a project what's going to be required. And how do I know that? Because all you have to do is go in and do your actuals, and you'll start to learn that there's a lot of twists and turns in the project itself, things that you didn't anticipate, things that the client didn't anticipate, that would make it impossible for you to accurately bid. So just work on an overall lump sum, get the client to approve that budget, and then take a percentage of that and pay and use that as your budget to pay the team. And this is what it looks like now. So obviously there are no description in here, but there are a couple of phases, and then you just write what it includes. So the next side is basically some rough terms and conditions. The client signs off on it. So here's the bullet point summary of this: is big round numbers are best. And what we're doing is we're obfuscating how we calculate the budget so that they can't break our formula. We are going to defeat the client's ability to comparison bid because there's not going to be enough information in there for them to figure it out. What we need to do is clearly articulate what each deliverable entails. Otherwise, we're going to suffer from undefined scope creep. This is the the design studio's worst nightmare, where you're so unclear about what is the deliverable that pretty much anything they say can work. And the other rule here, of course, is not to ever produce a bid without knowing what the budget tolerance is from the client. This is why it's so important for us to say the price before we show the price. Now, as a rule of thumb, once the project awards, we allocate 30% of the budget maximum to spend producing the work. So if we receive $100,000, we tell the producers and the creative directors, you're now allowed to spend $30,000 of that 100 to actually get the work done. Now, you all might have that reaction, which my team had once before, which is, so what are you going to do with the $70,000 that you put in your pocket, Chris? So, well, that's coming from an uninformed point of view. What you're doing is you're spending 30% as the cost of goods sold, which is what it takes to produce the project. What you don't account for is my time, the executive producer's time, which appears nowhere, my accountant, the legal team, insurance for the building, and all other kinds of things that you're not calculating. So when you actually look at all of that, all said and done, your gross profit margin isn't 70%. It's actually more like 20%. And that's why when you start to spend more than 30 or 35% of the total allocated budget to produce a project, you're going to eventually go out of business. So there it is. So 15 to 40% is the maximum that should be spent. This is the mother of them all. This is value-based pricing, the holy grail of pricing for all creative services. This is it. This is it. This is like the shroud of Christ. This is it, guys. Value-based pricing. It's a radical concept. So, let's take a deep breath. Simply, it's setting the price primarily according to the perceived or estimated value of a product or service to the customer, rather than according to the cost of the product or historical prices. So we have to spend a lot of time looking deep into the customer, the client's business, to understand the value and help them to see the value, okay? And all this while, we're not selling anything. We're just going to talk. And as a reminder here, this is a giant mental hurdle, so I have to spend some time talking about this, okay? Value, like beauty, art, and fairness, is in the eye of the beholder. So there's this thing called the subjective theory of value, that all value is personal and subjective. So I have 3 examples I'm going to run by you really quickly, just to let you understand. You've already been a victim of value-based pricing everywhere. So when you buy a ticket on an airline, you're saying in the price that you pay, and it's very rare that any 2 people pay the same price, depending on when you buy it. If you want an aisle seat, if you want an upgraded meal, if you want more leg room, if you want to be in the escape alley or the exit aisle, or if you want to be in the premium economy, business class or first class. Each one of these things has a different price tag. Regardless, they all get you from point A to point B. So we need to understand that this is a variable price based on the value that you see. Now, some people, if you were to let them, they would always be in the very back with no leg room, with no meal, because they want the cheapest price possible. And that's okay too. There's another way to look at this in terms of value-based pricing as a reflection of the benefit that the person perceives. Now, we know that a can of Coke, a single serving, if you bought it at Costco at a wholesale discount retail place, is $5.79 for a 12-pack, which is fairly cheap because it works out to be about 48 cents a serving if I did my math correctly last night. If you buy it at a vending machine, depending on where you go and the temperature of the day, the price can fluctuate between $1.25 to $1.75, and even more so depending on where you're at, especially if you're at the beach. So the same can of Coke, single serving, is 2 to 3 times the cost. And what they're selling you is convenience, from having to buy a 12-pack, from having to wait in line, and then to put it in a cooler and pack it in ice, and to carry it because it's kind of heavy. Requires no planning. So they're selling you convenience at that point. So convenience is more important to you. If it's not, you would have brought your own. Now, you would think that's pretty expensive, but in the movie theater, a single serving, the smallest serving that they offer you, is $4.50. That's 9 times the cost of what it would take if you bought at Costco and you were able to smuggle it in. The reason why they have that is because, first of all, they have a monopoly on it. They don't allow you to bring in external beverages. And this is where movie theaters make most of their money. It's not actually in the ticket sales themselves. It's in the concession stands. This is the ultimate convenience for you because you just get to enjoy the meal. Well, the things that they're tapping into now are a little bit more emotional based because you want to have this cinematic experience. Maybe you're reliving a childhood moment, or you're going to extend one to your own child, a son or a daughter. It's playing a little bit into your ego as well, especially if you're going out on a date. You're saying to your date, don't worry, I can afford this, and I'm not stingy. Get the extra large popcorn. Oh, you want the jujubes with that? We can do that as well. So you can get it all. So this is now tapping into your status symbol. The last quick example I'm going to have for you is if you've ever watched Survivor, there's a food auction that happens, and they've been out in the wilderness for a long time now, so they've been deprived of creature comforts. They are somewhat hungry. I wouldn't say that they're starving. And now when Jeff Probst, the show's host, asks, let's start the bidding on this bowl of chili cheese fries. Now, in the real world, you might not even want this. because it's fatty, it's not good for you. Maybe you do want it and you're willing to pay $5 or $8 for it. But here in an auction, in any kind of auction, value-based pricing is very clear. Each person has a different attachment to what that thing is, and they're willing to pay whatever they're going to. So the fair market allows them to pay that. So the same bowl of chili cheese fries, same exact bowl, could have 4, 10 different prices depending on how many people are bidding on it. Some people are like, I don't care. I don't need chili cheese fries. I'm focused on winning this thing. Some people are like, oh my God, I would kill for that right now. Here's $175. Okay, so now we need to master value-based pricing. Here's what I know about value-based pricing. It's based on perceived benefits to the customer, not the cost to produce. If you need to recite that to yourself 100 times, you need to understand that it's not about you, it's about them. The way we do that is we highlight the desired future state with the client. And what we want to do is focus on solutions that generate financial or emotional gain for the client. We have to adopt a facilitation mindset where we're asking questions versus providing answers. This is critical. And in doing so, we establish ourselves as an expert, and we have the flip, what Blair calls the flip, where we go from being perceived as a vendor to being a consultant. And the way this works is you have to deal with the senior decision maker. Otherwise, value-based pricing does not work at all. If you're working with some kind of underling, an assistant, it's not going to work. Okay, so we looked at this now. Hopefully through this module alone, you've seen that you've been making a mistake. So you may have started out pricing cost of goods sold. Basically what it costs you is what you charge the client, mistakenly thinking that that's profitable. And what you've realized through this course so far is that cost of goods sold plus some padding in terms of the rate and in terms of the people will actually make you more money. And then you've also learned that adding a profit margin is truly where you actually have profit is going to be great. But it's not taking into consideration the value to the client. This is critical. This is where if you just sold the chili cheese fries for one price, that's it. And then if you added a profit margin on top of it to say, oh my gosh, it costs us to do that in terms of raw ingredients and service. But if we added a profit margin, if we double the price, we're going to be pretty good. In the auction, you realize the true value to the client. And how is this determined? Basically, the value to the client can be created via increase in downloads or subscription rates, or maybe more people register for something. They purchase more often at a higher price. Maybe you help them to expand exposure and reach. Maybe they're getting higher click-through rates, or you're driving engagement with comments and likes. Maybe in developing an idea, you help them to develop a new product. Maybe you help them to gain clarity or allow them to get to be first to market. That's pretty good. And then there's also risk mitigation. This is actually a powerful motivation in terms of value to the client, that you're preventing loss of sales. Maybe you rewrote the copy so now there's less confusion. People are not moving through the site and bouncing at a higher rate, so they have clarity there. Maybe you're going to avoid lower conversion, slow to market, and resources. In the pricing logo design, when we were determining the price, basically we challenged the client by saying, this is probably not a valuable thing for your organization, because you won't suffer any loss of sales if we change this or if we don't change it. We're indifferent about this. And then the clients will come back to us and say, no, we are actually going to lose sales if this goes incorrectly. And then the Tropicana example comes up, where they redesigned the Tropicana packaging, the orange juice, and they lost a couple of $1 million of sales just by changing the packaging. So there's a cost of doing it wrong, and we want to avoid that. So that's where the value to the client exists. So we ask them questions like, what do they have to lose? What do they have to gain? And to realize that some of this is emotional, that there's prestige, there's recognition, peace of mind, there's value to peace of mind, and opportunity cost. If we do this, what else aren't we doing? So there's some approaches I'm going to share with you, okay? There's 3 approaches, I think. Here we go. Approach number 1 is you can use HubSpot. And HubSpot has a woman as an astronaut helmet. And so I decided to find an image that we could use with this woman in a helmet. And HubSpot, you can look up a company's annual revenue. There's a free tool according to Ben Burns. I've not used it, but on HubSpot, you can look up a company. You can see how much money they have, how much revenue they have per year.
Yeah, guys, this is the customer relationship manager. It's a free tool by HubSpot. And as soon as you create a contact, which is just pasting an email in the block, the company is created in your account, and 9 times out of 10, they'll have their annual gross revenue right there in the box.
Okay, so we need to know this because it's relative to each customer. So we're going to price the client and not the job. So the bigger the client, the more they have at risk, the more they have to gain. And so therefore, we need to know what their revenue is. Approach number 2, less scientific, but it can also work in case for whatever reason you can't get on HubSpot and they're not listed on HubSpot. You can find out the number of employees they have, and you can multiply it by about 250,000, which is the cost of, basically, if they don't earn more than $250,000 per employee, they're going to go out of business. So this is the basic formula, okay? So for the math's sake, we say if they have 100 employees times 250,000, they're a $25 million company in terms of revenue. Tech companies, this formula is just way off the charts. Anything in tech, because tech is highly scalable. This is a more traditional model here. It could be 600,000. It could be whatever. I don't know. Okay. If you actually go and look them up on LinkedIn, most companies show how many employees are connected. Now that number is generally low because not every employee at the company has a LinkedIn account, nor are connected with them on a LinkedIn page. So that's the lowest number it's going to be. So you can assume if they display 100 employees at that company, there could be as many as 200 employees that are not listed. So what we now understand is once we figure out the revenue that a company has per annum, most companies, 10% of their revenue is allocated towards marketing. So in this case, a $25 million company spends $2.5 million a year in marketing, and all marketing, internal marketing team, printing costs, web development, app development, social ads, media buy, all that kind of stuff. They're going to spend about $2.5 million before your eye is going to pop out of your head. Okay. So basically the calculation works something like this. Relative to the marketing budget, you need to understand how important is this initiative. So if they're relaunching a website or relaunching their logo or identity or rebranding, how important is this relative to what they're going to spend that entire year? What kind of impact will it have on the business? And you could even ask them that question. So some percentage of that importance is reflected in the marketing budget. So in a $2.5 million annual budget, you can say 10% of that, if it's really important, could be $250,000. And that's how you price this project. Now, this is all done without facilitation. This is just using numbers and math and making an educated guess. So when they ask you to do a rebrand for them, and they're a fairly sizable company with in excess of $2.5 million in terms of marketing budget, you can then float a number about $250,000 to design a logo. And that's how meaning Mr. Ben Burns, was able to charge an astronomically high price for a logo job that we did recently. I think he charged $180,000.
Yeah, it was $180,000 for the logo. It's $250,000 for all the marketing,
all the other stuff.
And stuff.
Yeah. So Ben used the exact HubSpot technique, figured out their marketing budget, and figured out some percentage. It could be 1% if the company is really big. But now you have some kind of metric to determine what kind of ballpark you want to play in. Okay, so if I haven't blown your mind away just yet, and then here comes the hammer. It's going to drop right now. Okay, this is perhaps the most interesting one to me because it allows the client to tell you how valuable the project is to them. It doesn't require you to do any research or any calculations or anything that makes your brain hurt. It'll make your brain hurt in a different way. So approach 3 is the one that you can learn more about in Blair Enns' book, Pricing Creativity, which I've studied, and I'm teaching you that right now. Okay. So if you read it, we can have a conversation about it, or you can use this as a jumpstart for it. What we need to do is to surface the desired future state of the client. What we need to do is to determine the needs and uncover the wants. Both are very important. So only through achieving the wants do people become truly happy. And that's why there's a focus on the wants. Okay. So there's this golden question. that was what Blair referred to from another author. And basically the structure is something like this. And you've seen me do this before. You ask them, well, basically years from now, 3 years from now, so not too far in the future, but 3 years seems to be a good number. 3 years from now, you are really happy with the progress that we made together. What has happened to make you really happy? And you could ask that question almost verbatim. Okay? Now remember, before, both the pricing inputs and outputs, we need to focus on the solution. Like, what does it look like? And then we are working on providing an estimate to determine the price. And in that process, we're making sure the value is aligned to the client. Do they feel the price is a fair value given what you're going to deliver? And then the client gets to make that determination. So remember, early on, we talked about making this flip. This is the exact wrong sequence for pricing, value-based pricing. Okay, so we have to flip the whole cycle. So we invert this thing. It's going to look like this now. We got to focus on the client. What's important to them? What do they perceive to be valuable? And provide some pricing guidelines, and hopefully I spelled it correctly. And then talk about the solution only at the end of this process. So we're going to spend a lot of time here. Okay, we're going to take a moment here to break out for an exercise. Okay, so 3 years from now, what has happened to make you so happy? And it just requires 3 columns. The desired future state, whatever metrics of success, the success metrics, and then what value can we assign to that? Okay, so it could look something like this. We want to optimize the sales funnel, and that's fantastic. How will we know we hit that? Well, we'll see a 20% increase in conversion. Perfect. And what will that mean to you in value? Well, we're going to generate over $1 million just the first year. And what we would do is we write down with the client, and it takes time to work through this and ask clarifying questions, all the desired future state. And then we would go across and do all the success metrics. And then finally, we would do the value.
So 3 years from now, what has happened to make you so happy?
I'm making $200,000 a year. And really, that's it. That's all I need.
Okay.
I just want to make $200,000 a year. I'll be happy.
Okay, so how can we measure this $200,000 a year?
Well, it'll be in my bank account. Well, I'll have a more consistent client base. So month to month, I can count on consistent income coming in. I will be, people will be coming to me for work. I won't be going out to look for work.
Is there a specific number of people coming to you for work?
Say that again?
Would there be a specific number of people coming to you for work?
No, actually, the fewer the better. I just want to make more money off of each person.
So we're talking like 5 clients, each of them giving you like 40 grand each, something like that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Are you talking to me? You're not allowed to get any help from me.
Okay.
Stay in this.
All right, so okay.
I'm just taking notes for you, that's all.
Okay, sorry, I got it wrong with you. So, okay, so out of this 200K, let's say if I were to take like 10% of it, right, in order to, guarantee that you make 200K a year, is that like a fair trade to you?
So you're saying you'd like to charge me 10% to make this happen? Would that be valuable to me?
Yeah, so I'm literally saying that, you know what, I'm going to charge you 20K. 180K is like for, unexpected risk, the possibility of not getting it. I'm saying that with 20K given to me, I can get you 200K by the end of the year.
So you can guarantee that in 3 years I'll have consistent income of $40,000 a client. I'm only going to have to take 5 clients a year, and you're only going to charge me $20,000?
Yeah, sure.
I'd take that deal.
All right. Hold on. We're gonna let Isaac off the hook for a second. The problem is you're learning this, and Isaac needs to take greater control of the conversation and he needs to be able to drive deeper and stay in the consultative state, he's going to the sale so fast. And what he needs to do is control this. So somebody else who has a better idea of how to facilitate this conversation, because when Pam said $200,000 for the future state, she's going right to the number and the success metrics or even the value right away. So it's getting all messed up. So what happens, very typical, is clients will self-diagnose and prescribe what has to happen. What you have to do is you have to uncover what's going on. So you have to ask lots of clarifying questions, Isaac, to understand what she means. And you have to prompt her at times so that she can fill out the desired future state in more depth than what you have right now. Okay? So don't go to the sale. You already went so fast to the sale. So if I go back to this screen here, you'll see that I want to optimize my sales funnel, which is very similar to what she's saying. She wants a great inbound funnel, and you need to use your words to help direct this conversation. Okay, so optimize sales funnel, and then you can say like, well, what does that success look like? Well, I'm going to have at least a 20% increase in conversion. What's that worth to you? Well, it's going to be $1 million. Then you get into the price. The price is not even on this as a chart. We're not going to talk about what we're going to charge them just yet. I want you to practice having the value price conversation right now, value-based pricing, okay?
Hi, Pam.
Hey, Ashley.
How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Okay, so you and I are talking about, you know, the end deliverable on this and what your end game is, right? So if I'm looking at you and we're 3 years down the road and we're sitting, we're having coffee on Bay Street and you are just like over the moon happy. What have we done? What has made you feel so good about yourself?
I'm working less and making more money.
Are you? Do you like a number of, do we have like a goal? Like what does more money? I know you're in Halifax, so what feels good for you?
I'd like to be making $200,000 a year.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be about double what I'm making right now.
Yeah. So we want to increase it about 2 times. Okay, cool. Is there anything else that is that $200,000 is going to help, like time or, you know, why 200,000?
Right. So right now what's happening is I'm taking on a lot of different projects, but they're smaller values. So I'm working a ton of hours to try and make, you know, just sort of my minimum amount. I'd like to take on less clients and charge them more money each time so that I have a little bit more time to spend with my family and more time to travel and more time to concentrate on growing my business, hire some more people.
Yeah.
Which I don't have control over that right now.
Yeah. And that $200,000 is yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. It would give me peace of mind and some security.
Okay. That's awesome. That sounds like something that is really important to you. And I think that taking that $200,000 and if we break it down into like why, I think that'll really help us have like a North Star to work towards too, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. How can we, Can we end scene?
Ashley, you read the book. What are you talking about?
I know, I did read the book. The book. Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's great.
You're supposed to apply what you learned. Okay, I'm gonna help you out. I want you to stay online, okay?
Okay.
What you want to do is you just want to map this across. Like each bullet point gets a success metric. Okay, I'll help you out here, okay? Mm-hmm. So Pam, how could you tell that you're working less? What does the success metric look like? What are you working now? And then you want to reduce your workload by what percentage or how many hours do you want to work a week?
I'd like to reduce it by 50%, but I'd like to make double my income.
Okay, we'll take it one at a time.
Right now.
So how many hours are you working today? 80 hours?
Today I'll put in 12 hours.
Okay.
So I'm working anywhere from 9 to 12 hours a day. Okay,
so what would success look like to you? You work 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week, 25 hours? What do you think?
30 would be great. 30 would be amazing.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a success metric. 30-hour a week. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm looking at this like, oh yeah, this sounds amazing.
Doesn't it?
It's right.
It does. That's what you're supposed to do, you guys. Okay. So what is your current MLE right now?
Okay, we'll even it out. It's low. It's higher than 5, but 5 for the sake of this.
So currently it's 5K. What would you like it to be?
20.
Okay, so that's more than double then. You're talking about 4 times?
It is, but I want less clients.
Okay. So you want MLE.
I want more.
Right?
I want better clients.
That's actually the exact right number, because if you want to make $200,000 a year, you're supposed to only have 10 clients. So your MLE has to be 20K.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay. What would it mean? How would you know you have more time with family and travel? Like how many days or out of the year do you want to travel?
4 weeks.
Wow. This is awesome. 4 weeks of vacation time.
Yeah. Well, we get 3 in Canada pretty much typically anyway. So I want an extra.
When you're self-employed, you get
somebody
0.
else. We do. If we're self-employed.
Yeah. When somebody else is buying that, you get that. Let's not forget that you're in business for yourself and you have a horrible boss. All right. Okay. So more time with family. Okay. Last one is you want to be able to hire more people. How many more people would you like to hire?
1. Just 1 would be amazing.
You have 0 employees right now?
I have 0. Well, I have people who I collaborate with, but I want to hire.
But no employees. Okay.
No employees.
So 1 full-time employee. Are you setting your goal high enough in 3 years?
Maybe not.
I don't think so. Let's adjust this a little bit. We're talking about 3 years, not this year.
Right. Okay.
So if you have a full-time employee, what's it going to cost you to get a full-time employee?
Well, you said 1 full-time employee is 2, how much, many millions? Or
200,000? No, that's how you calculate companies' revenue, not your own.
Right.
But in Canada, if you got a really good, solid, rock solid right-hand woman, how much would you have to pay that person?
Probably $60,000 a year for the type of talent.
Okay, so in 3 years, how many of these super talented people do you want working for you?
I just want 1. I want 1 person who
in
I can
3
really
years?
rely on.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to manage people. That's not why I got into working for myself, because I've done that before. So 1 person who could work from their home, who I could rely on.
Perfect.
That would be awesome.
Okay. All right. So what if I could tell you that I can make all this stuff happen? If you could work 30 hours a week, what would that be worth to you in terms of dollars?
Well, it would depend on if I was making the actual money that I need to make to allow me to work 30 hours a week.
I mean, let's just assume that things are going fantastic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember, we're kind of looking into the future, and things are wonderful, and you have the business and the money that you need, but yet you're working a lot less than you're working now. How much would you pay to be able to do that?
I don't know. I've never been asked that question before. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation now. Why don't we just throw something out there and we can adjust it? I'm not going to hold you to it.
All right. What are you thinking?
I don't want to say it. It's up to you, really. I mean, even if today, if nothing else changed and you worked half the amount of time, what would you pay? What would that be worth to you?
Maybe $20,000, $30,000.
That sounds fair. Let's just say 20K. I don't want to get too crazy here. Perfect. And if you were able to increase your MLE by a factor of 4 times, what would that be worth to you?
By a factor of 4.
Yeah, if you've been able to increase it 4x.
Where I want to be. Again, I'm not sure.
Just throw out a number.
Maybe more than 20K, because 1 client would be worth 20K. So
right, and you get 10 of them. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say 30K.
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
Yeah. And if you can be guaranteed 4 weeks of vacation time from here on out, what would that be worth to you?
Wow. Well, probably 20K.
Probably, at least family time.
How much a vacation is? I mean, a vacation is going to cost me that, right?
But then you have the luxury to be able to take that time off.
I can go and do it.
Okay. Now, what if we are able to help you get into a position where you can afford to hire a full-time employee and take a lot of the workload off your plate?
Well, I'd also be making more money if I could afford to hire a full-time employee.
Yeah.
Probably more than 200K a year.
Probably more than 200K a year.
Right?
Boom.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you have 200% growth in revenue, what would that be worth to you?
200% growth in revenue?
Two times.
Two times.
Yeah.
That's 2 times. Okay. Put another 20K on there.
Wouldn't it be worth 100K? You do 100K and you double it. It shouldn't be worth.
Well, if you double it, then it's worth it. If it's consistent income forever, as long
forever. It's at least worth 100K because from here on out, you're going to be making double what you make now.
That's right.
$1 million.
It's at least worth 100K.
It's probably worth 100K.
Yeah. All right. All right. So now this is kind of the value we're assigning to achieving these goals. So what I like to do is, if I were to do the math here, that's 50, 70, 270, $370,000. So I'm going to put that down here. A total of 370K. Okay. And this is where I say, if I can guarantee your success, I would charge you $370,000 to do that. But we want to discount. I can't guarantee that, right? Because I'm not going to run your business. So we discount for uncertainty. So if I were to charge you somewhere between 20 to 10% of this, that would net out, 10% would be 37. So I'm doing the math in my head here. It would be 74,000. So if I could guarantee you these results and charge you $74,000 to do this, would that seem to be a fair amount to charge you?
Seems fair.
I think so too. Fantastic.
Given those results.
What's that?
Given those results.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away. I'm going to write a proposal and I'm going to give you some options to think about and let's see if we can make this happen. Okay?
Okay.
Straight out of the book, guys.
Straight out of the book. Straight out of the book. Straight out. Okay? All right. Okay, Ashley and Pam, let's talk about this. We just went straight out of Compton. Here we are. Let's talk. What do you guys think? Ashley, what do you think? Because you've read the book, you know the book, and now we just did it.
This is I'm referring back to the book at the same time, and it's just a more cleaned up version of this book, right? Like everything is in here step by step, including like the way that you concluded it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You did it. Yep.
So you're saying I'm a good student.
Yes.
Or a good teacher.
Yeah. So you see a lot of the stress is removed because I'm not convincing. I don't want to use my words, but I'm helping to direct the conversation. And it's important for me to kind of keep coaching and encouraging Pam to play along with my game. Okay. For some reason, I don't know why it is. I'm going to have to ask Pam. So Pam, get ready for this. It seemed like you just opened up a little bit more when we started to talk about this. And why was that?
Well, I think it's a topic that's fairly personal too, right? So this is real. This is very real for me. So that's the only way I'd be able to do this exercise is something that actually means something. Yeah. So I think that if you try to put myself in the mindset where I'm actually talking about an actual issue that I can identify with, it's a lot easier to talk about it.
100%. That's why I wanted you to play yourself. Yeah. Right? And we kept it real. Now check this out.
It was easier. Like I noticed that when we stopped just talking about like how much money do you want to make, it brought back like that sense of empathy, and it was easier for us to get like more detail. Exactly.
Okay. This is what Blair talks about in terms of needs versus want. I need $200,000, but I want to work less. I want to spend more time with my family. I'd like to go to Holland. I'd like to go to, I don't know, Paris. This is what she wants. And when we talked about fulfilling the wants is truly how she's going to become happy. Now, I'm not criticizing Isaac, but when we started with $200,000 a year, this is what we got. And then he went straight to the close. He left a lot of money on the table here. So he didn't fully scope and diagnose, and we weren't trying to understand the desired future state. He was too focused on the bottom line and closing, right? So I want to spend a lot of time here because essentially I can almost feel the emotion coming through this computer screen when we talk about having more time to working less. Like even writing it down 30 hours a week. Ashley was like, I'm on that right now. Let's work on that plan, Chris. That sounds wonderful.
When you're an entrepreneur, that's ideal, right?
Well, it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a human being and you're working for a living. The normal work week in a lot of countries is 40 hours and some it's more. But 30-hour work week is fantastic. You're working 1 day less a week. That means you have a 3-day weekend forever.
It's a dream.
That is a dream. We can make that dream happen, you guys. And I would charge you less than $64,000 to make that happen, or $74,000. Okay? It's a bargain. This is a bargain. It's going to work. All right.
All right. So my question actually was, so if you're charging about, let's say, 70K for this, but you're charging a future state, can the client actually afford that 70K at this point in time, given that if she's making 100K a year, is she ready to basically pay 70% of what she's making a year for this?
That depends. It's not my concern. All I need to do is have the value conversation. She knows how much money she made, and she readily jumped at this. You notice I felt like almost no resistance from her. Once you highlight the desired future state, she was thinking, oh my God, there's places I can go, things I can do, time I'm going to have back, and I'm going to have a stronger family. I'm going to be able to spend quality time with my kids and my husband. This is going to be fantastic. Did you feel any resistance from her? I didn't. She's willing to do it. That's not for you to decide, see? The art, you understand that, right?
Yeah.
It's all about them. And if they say, well, why? No, that's too much money. $74,000 is too much. Okay, well, I said between 74 and 37,000 would make sense. I can come up with some options in there. Is that going to be palatable for you? And considering this is just the first year gain for you, think about every year afterwards, what's going to happen. Doesn't it seem reasonable to spend 10% to capture $370,000 worth of value? Doesn't that seem reasonable to you? So I can only work with reasonable people here, right? So if they are not good business people and they're really miserly, the whole conversation about determining fit, if they can't see it, I'm walking away. Right? So I can tell, right? So if you say to somebody, you're working too much, and she's like, yes, I want to work 30 hours a week. And I say, well, what's the value to you? And she said, $10. It's like, really? Then you need to buy that option somewhere right now, because this is not important for you at all. And then they can either respond in an affirmative, or they can say, yeah, you're right, I'm out of here. Boom, I'm done. You guys think it's unbelievable, yet if you've watched my episode with Ron Segal, and you just watch this right now, the conversation is very natural and it flows just like this. You'll have to give it a try at some point. I don't expect anybody to jump on this right away and master this. You need to role play, you need to practice this, and you need to master this part of it. And you're allowed to fail a little bit. But no matter what you do, even if you failed, like let's say, I'm not calling Isaac a failure, but even if you did it Isaac's way, at least he was able to determine a $20,000 value on this thing.
Right. Well, I was able to negotiate, for example, at least with some older clients where I had a decent sort of relationship with, I was able to negotiate revenue share. But revenue share seems a bit more like, okay, if I make it, then I'm paying. So it's a bit, but if you're charging that lump sum, I feel a lot of people being charged from it. So that's why I asked about it.
Okay, let's talk about revenue share. Okay, a smart business person that believes in their business will be very tight in giving you revenue share. You do need to realize that. If they believe in their business, it's much cheaper to pay you a flat fee than to give you a percentage of all future income. I'll give you an example. I have partnered up with people in the past to make products. When I realized there's a short-term win, but a long-term pain point for me, I decided to just buy them out of their contract. I would rather pay them upfront thousands of dollars so I don't have to continue paying them for all of eternity. So typically, people who don't actually believe in their product will give you a profit share. Or people who are very cash starved will give you a profit share. Make sure that they're honest, good people, because it's very difficult for you to track them down if they give you profit share, okay?
My only question was, how do you put value behind some of these things, like working less? You're saying you're willing to pay $20,000 to work a 30-hour work week?
I'm not saying that.
I know, but you agreed with her, and you're like, yeah, okay, sure, and you put down $20,000.
She said more. I just put down the lower number of the two.
But if you were to work through this with somebody, I guess you're just literally writing down whatever they say. So you're getting them to say some number is basically what.
100%.
Okay.
And I want them to say a fair number. If they say a number too low, I'm like, really? If they say a number too high, I don't want to get greedy. I don't want to write like $2 million, even though they say that. I'll acknowledge it. Say, yeah, it's probably worth $2 million, but that seems like a pretty high number. Let's do something more reasonable, like 400,000 or something. If you guys don't believe me, watch the episode on the Flux channel on YouTube with Ron Segal. Check it out. You'll see the exact same phenomenon happen, and he's giggling the whole time.
But what I had thrown in there is when Pam was trying to come up with that number, I thought it would be $60,000 because the $60,000 is what she said she wanted to hire somebody at. So for me to work a 30-hour work week, I'm going to have to hire somebody to do that work. So that value to me is $60,000. Would that be correct? Or
that would be totally correct. I could do this exact exercise with everybody in this class, and you would give me a different number. That's the beauty of value-based pricing. Each person values it differently. So for example, I forget who's in our group, but they have a fairly large size company, millions of dollars. And for them to work a 30-hour work week would be $1 million for them. It's relative to the person. And if you could take 4 weeks of vacation from your crazy busy hectic schedule right now, somebody might say that's worth my life because my marriage is falling apart and my kids are looking at me like I'm a stranger to them. That's worth more money than I have. And I say, well, let's not go crazy. Let's just put some number on that. And we'll devise a solution after the fact to solve this problem. Notice there's no solution here. I didn't talk about what I was going to do at all. I just needed to understand what their goal was, how they're going to measure success, and what value they assign to each, because I want to solve the most valuable problems.
When it came to the bracketing, when you say $50,000 to $20,000, do people question you because normally you don't speak high number to low number, or you don't read right to left kind of a thing. You said that in the video for low budget clients when you were in Edinburgh. And every time I listen to it, I think you're saying $15,000 to $20,000 because it doesn't sound right. It's not the natural way of speaking. So do you get anybody to question that, or how does that work?
I'm going to be full honest, transparent with you, JD. I've not started with the highest number only until after I started reading the theories in the books that I'm reading right now, that you need to start with the highest number. So there's a very good chance, if you heard me say this before in previous videos or in workshops, I probably said 15 to 20K. I mean, usually the gap's a little bit bigger than that. I might say 15 to 50K, but 15 is already 2 times higher than what I was thinking. So I was already price bracketing really high, and I was using the 50K as an anchor. But the first piece of information is much more powerful if you deliver it with the highest number first. So you may just say, I have a couple of options. One will cost $50,000. A different option might be $15,000. So you're not going to just say it in one breath, so that there's a moment to process what that is.
Makes sense.
Okay. And I've actually had this conversation prior to understanding the exact philosophy behind it, or the mechanics, the science. And I've had this conversation with clients before, especially low budget clients. I know coming in the door, they're a small operation. They have under 10 employees. Most of those people cannot afford us. We're not dealing with venture capitalists like Ashley, right? So most of those people can't afford it. So here's what I say. Before we go too deep here, I just want to let you know our minimum level of engagement, regardless of what you ask me to do, is going to be $100,000. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking to you right now unless this is within your budget range. So I just anchored really high right there. They're like, oh my gosh. And just long silence, right? It's like, whoa, Chris, I'm not sure that, I'm not saying you're not worth it. It's just, I don't think we have that kind of budget. I say, okay, that's fine. Let's talk a little bit more. I mean, are you in the $50,000 range? Where are we at here? So now they're negotiating against themselves, given the anchor I just dropped. They're thinking, I can't afford you. I just don't have the money. We're not as successful as we need to be. This is how I'm retreating now. I tried to kill the engagement. I'm retreating to see if they follow. They're like, woo! I was thinking this is going to be $80 like Fiverr kind of thing, Chris. I'm like, super. We're not a good fit for you right now. Okay? I wish you the best. Make a ton of money and consider us next time when you're at that stage. and that's it. And then we're out. All right, so what we want to do is after we determine the value, we want to use some pricing guidelines. So typically speaking, I like to start with consultants charge somewhere around 20% of the value gained in the first year. And then that's the anchor right there. So 20% of $370,000 is $74,000. And just let that live for a little bit. And then you can ask, is that within the parameters of what you're prepared to spend to achieve this? All right, now I'm going to show you some hybrid forms of value-based pricing. This isn't perfect, but I want to show you what it might look like. So now if you want to do value-based pricing, I might do something like this. I'm going to do a variable bid, which has a fixed component and a variable component to it. So we will do discovery. This is where we go and scope and diagnose the problem, surface the goals, the customer needs and wants and all that kind of stuff. And that's a fixed fee. Most everything else is variable, and this is just a guideline. And I tell the clients that, so they have an understanding of what might, the cost associated with producing all this work. But all I care about in this phased engagement is to get the $50,000 and I start working with them. I'm very confident in the value we're going to create for the client, that they're going to have no problem spending the money for the rest of this stuff. And like I said before, this is how we're able to take a $100,000 maximum engagement from a client and turn it into a $250,000 assignment times 3 within a matter of a month. Because we're going in and we're doing discovery properly, but this is what it would look like, okay? So we know that the website, apps, certain things, social media campaigns, there's a wide range of what is involved. So that's why we kind of have a wide range. But certain things that we know, oh, it's going to cost this, and we can more or less approximate the cost. And then we supply them with an estimated timeline. That's what it looks like with key milestones. We try to make it look pretty. Ben's done a pretty good job of making this stuff look good. It looks something like that. So the summary on this is we need to determine the business goals and objectives. We need to understand and determine the business needs and the individual wants. The business needs, in Pam's case, to make $200,000. The individual want is free time to travel, to work less, to have an assistant or a designer, because maybe that makes them feel more accomplished. Maybe they wanted to win some awards or whatever. It's a form of validation. Those are all the individual wants. It says, I'm successful. I finally made it. We need to remain in the facilitation mindset. And the way we do that is we ask lots of questions. We avoid providing solutions. Do not race to the money part. That is the mistake. You can ask the 3-year question, follow up, and ask clarifying questions as needed. When you're done, reflect back what you heard. So this is where you guys need to bone up on this. I heard you say this. Is this what you meant? I want to be clear. This is what that looks like. Can you give me an example? You go back and forth until you figure that stuff out. And then you do it kind of in an order. Then determine the success metrics, assign a value, and then offer pricing guidelines. Now I'm all paranoid. I'm going to tell you that we have some resources for you. If you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, there's a great podcast, the Two Bobs podcast. It's the Mastering the Value Conversation, what we just did. They spent about 30 minutes talking about it. Of course, read the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, but I think I've shared a lot of the concepts with you in application. Pricing Creativity is also an excellent book, but as Ashley may have pointed out, I think I just covered it in that one example. Matthew told me about Jonathan Stark. He has this article called Hourly Billing is Nuts. If you're not sure, read it. You're going to get more information. Okay, we're going to give you our input bid form, and our output bid form, which we're selling as a separate kit as part of this thing. Okay, so here's the summary, guys. This is the bidding overview. You generally start as a freelancer. You move into pricing inputs, but now we've learned how to do this properly to make this much higher than the way that you've been doing it currently. And as you graduate from that, you can use the exact same form and just firm bid it. And you need to add in a buffer. You need to pad it somewhere between 30 to 80% because now you're taking on the risk. Okay. Typically speaking, when you charge higher in that range, say on the 80%, like 180K, the client may push back a lot. And they might say, well, the other vendor's going to come in at 150. And my general response to that objection is this, is to say, I want a client relationship that is as frictionless as humanly possible. I know that things change along the way, and within a certain latitude, I don't want to charge you an overage. I don't want to nickel and dime you so that you feel reluctant to call me. I think $30,000 more is a pretty good cushion so that I don't have to do that. If you agree, let's do this work. Now, typically, an agency or studio and working through a producer, not a senior decision maker. Typically speaking, the client is coming to you self-diagnosed and they're going to prescribe the solution for you. We need a new video, we need to rebrand, and you're happy to oblige. No problem with that. Just charge the fair value of the work that you're doing. The value-based pricing model, which is the holy grail, like I said, it highlights the desired future state. And this is where you can actually achieve the double thank you. Okay? This scenario, you run that diagnostic, you're the trusted advisor consultant, and you must work with the senior decision maker or a C-suite executive. That's it.
I have a lot of problems with the 50% upfront because projects are often last minute, like 2 weeks ahead of time. And my bad. Disappeared. And the payment process takes 30 days. So how do you do the upfront payment and negotiate around net 30 or net 60?
Okay. Your inability to get 50% upfront is mostly your problem. It's not the client's problem because you're soft and you accept it. So if you want a knuckle sandwich, just sign up for one and you're going to get one. Okay. So I would invoke, it's our policy. Just say it's our policy not to book teams. Forget about starting. It's our policy not to start. In consideration, this is a rush job. I highly recommend you talk to Sally in accounting and cut us a check ASAP so we can get started. Because we cannot start. Now, I'll tell you this has happened many, many times before, especially when we have a live action shoot, like where we've booked the cinematographer, cast and crew, and we're going to start shooting in downtown Los Angeles on a Wednesday. Tuesday, the check has not arrived. We make it extremely clear to the client, if the check should not arrive by Wednesday morning, we will cancel the shoot and they're on the hook for paying for it anyways. Guess what happens? A human being appears on site with the check in hand on the next morning. Every single time. Every single time. So you just need to be firm with that. You're not being a jerk about it, but it's your policy, so don't change your policy for nothing. Okay? And then the last part, which is getting the last percent, like the last 25%. If you have problems with clients paying you net 15, net 30, net 60, whatever, you hold that file hostage, but you have to be very clear up front. You can say to them, I'm a small business owner. I've had problems with clients paying me on time, and it creates a cash flow issue for my company. My policy, our policy is that we must receive final payment prior to delivery. We will withhold assets at delivery until we receive that payment. Please have Sally prepare a check and the final amount ahead of time. Now, some agencies, it's their policy, so they also say it's our policy to pay net 90 or 60. And that's then up to you to decide whether or not you want to work with them or not. Okay? But here's the thing. Let me finish this part.
Yeah,
so here's the thing. If you get 50% up front and you get the 25% after the key milestone, you could probably survive because that is actually your profit margin. See how that winds up? You have a 25% profit margin and then you have a 25% last payment, you could probably do okay because theoretically there's already enough fat in that bid for you to make money that this doesn't become a problem. Now, the bigger the agency, the bigger the job, chances are the payment terms are very slow because they invoice their client. When their client pays them, they pay you. So they want that, and they want the flexibility to manage their cash flow as well. That's up to you. We've not been screwed by any big client. We've only been screwed by the small clients, like the 1 or 2 people operations. Ben Burns, go ahead. Back to you.
I was just saying, in all the client direct stuff that I've negotiated, whenever I see net 60 or net 90, typically it's always negotiable. Net 30 is really the industry standard. So I've always been able to negotiate it down to net 30.
So let's say if I bid for 3 designers for 10 days and then I only used 1, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, perfect question. Now, if you bid for 10 days and you only use 1, you don't know what you're doing when you're bidding, first of all. You're just like punching in the dark, right? So I told you this is based on experience. So it's just an estimate. And so the more accurate the estimate, the more experience you demonstrate. So in a pure inputs based bid, if it's more expensive, they pay more. If you use more time, they pay more. If you use less time, they pay less. So you could say, we anticipated using a modeler for 3 days, so we only used one. And then that's what you do for actuals, and that's what you bill the client. It's just an estimate. That's a difference there, okay? Now, when we did this as a company, we used this exact same form, except we turned it into a fixed bid. So it's kind of a very slippery line here. So the same bid form can work for both. It could work for a cost plus bid, which is a time and materials bid, or it could be a fixed bid. In a fixed bid scenario, whatever you write is what you charge. Doesn't matter if it costs you more to do, you're committed to doing the work for that amount of money. So it behooves you to charge what you think it's going to cost plus a little bit more.
So there's a bunch of questions that are very granular. They're all a little bit different, but it all has to do with the end. So when you deliver a job, when do you request payment, and then what happens if they're late? Maybe if you could just do like a broad overview of what happens at the end of the project.
Now, I have to be very honest with you guys. I don't think I've ever, or rarely ever, have done an input-based bid. I use this form, but I turn into a fixed bid because even in the beginning, even when I didn't know what I was doing, I never charged based on hourly unless I was working as a freelancer. So this is where it gets into like territory that I haven't put a lot of thought into. So if you're doing a classic purely input-based bid, how do you collect payment? How does this work? You might have an agreement where you bill them weekly as you go, and they need to keep paying you ahead of the next week. And you can't fall too far behind on payments because it's all based on cash flow, right? And it might be 2 weeks. It could be a week or 2 weeks, but whatever it is, they need to pay you as soon as they get the invoice, so that you just keep a running meter as to what's going on. Now, over time, if you just establish a relationship with the client, then it might be okay for you to bill 50% upfront for this kind of stuff, and then use that as credit against the time that's being used. And as you hit the third milestone, you might charge. It gets a little trickier, right? It gets a little trickier. So why don't we do this? It'll get a lot clearer, and you'll see soon why you need to move away from pricing inputs into pricing outputs. But we all start somewhere. So if you're the freelancer, pricing inputs and doing the way I just showed you is a really good way to start. You're going to make a lot more money, and you're going to realize that you're not accurately charging for all the things that you do.
What's the best way to find out fair market rate for some of the people that you're charging for?
Okay, we'll make sure we include this. There's, in graphic design, EAJ conducted an Aquient study, and it took, it ran a poll or a survey across all the markets to find out what the average rates were for each person. So an art director, creative director, designer, senior designer, web developer in all the major cities. You can look at it like that. But if you've also been in business for any period of time, you've booked freelancers before. We book 3D artists, Matthew. We book 3D artists for as little as $200 a day to probably as much as $800 a day. 8 is kind of topping out, right, Matt?
Yeah, some people are 1,000, but
whoa, we need to like revisit that after this. Anyways, let's say it's $1,000. That would be your A+ person. And then what I would say the benchmark to me would be about $800 a day. So if you can find anybody for less than $800 a day, you're doing pretty good. So you might pay some people $500 and $600. And you can also mandate to your producer or whoever is booking the team, look, we put in the budget this amount. I need you to hire people at this rate and work that way.
And I think part of this is you could just ask. I think if one thing that you should always be doing on the side is just as you're build your freelance database. So if you're searching on Behance, if you're searching on Instagram, start reaching out to people right away and start asking them what their rates are. And then you start building that database so you have a point of reference when you are ready to do a project with a client that you know in your head, oh, this person's $30 an hour, this person's $100 an hour. I need to adjust accordingly. And they probably need a week's worth of time to do this.
Yeah.
There's also this great book.
Yeah. What is that?
This is the Handbook for Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. It is by the Graphic Artists Guild, And it basically breaks down every category you could have. For example, the page that I'm on is fees for natural science illustration. And it says the editorial rate is between $60 and $75 per hour. The advertising rate is between $85 and $150 per hour. And it also lists like deliverable fees that are averaged across the industry. So handy.
It just so happens that we work with a lot of freelancers, probably in the most competitive market. So the rates that we have here are probably what we consider international standards. So if you're working from a smaller market or overseas somewhere where the local rates are lower, I would charge the international rate. And I'll tell you why. I was consulting with a gentleman. He's based out of Munich, and he has a Polish team working for him, and he's actually from Poland, so that makes sense. So the rates in which he's paying people are about a third of what they would pay in Munich. So I said that, here's the thing, you don't charge their rate, you charge the Munich, the Germany rate, and the reason why is because that is your competitive advantage. The fact that you're able to speak the language, know and vet a whole team that is reliable and can do the work is how you make money. There's no point for you to do that and only to pass those savings on to the client. It makes no sense. So you got to charge what the international rates are. And to me, the major markets are the US and the UK and parts of Germany. I would consider that the international rate.
When you change pricing away from inputs into fixed bid, into outputs, were your clients okay with it back in those days? Did you make the transition with current clients?
Very, very good question. Even in the early days, I was hard pressed to find a bid that I did that was based on hourly, and I couldn't find one because I've never priced things on an hourly basis. It's always been fixed bid. It's been some form of calculating hours, but turning it into a deliverable. So I've always practiced like maybe version 1.5. Oh, it's not second 1 or version 2. It's somewhere always in between. The only times I did hourly based pricing was when somebody booked me when I was freelancing somewhere, when I started my own studio. They're like, Chris, we need you to do some logo work. I just charge them a day rate. And whatever hours I worked, I just charged them for it. But I would bill in half-day increments because it's like it was insane to say I worked on this for an hour.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Next question.
Anonymous asks, how would we salvage a scenario where we would miss actually achieving the value that we put up?
Okay. So you mean you've done value-based pricing, you set up the metrics for success, and somehow you missed it, right?
Yeah. So I get what I got is
relationship.
Yeah. You went through the whole project, maybe it's a rebrand, and then at the end of the day, they didn't get what they thought they would.
Okay. So here's the problem is that the success metrics weren't clear. They need to be measurable, time-bound, and all that kind of stuff. You need to know what that's going to be. A rebrand has very soft metrics around it. That's why it's a slippery slope, okay? So the reason why I look for a problem that is geared towards solving a business, marketing, communications, conversion thing is because you know when you hit it because you can put a check mark next to it. To say we want to refresh the brand, it's like, well, anything that we do will be considered or not considered having completed that task. This is where it becomes really difficult to measure. This is why if you're a designer, a traditional designer, a classical designer, this is very dangerous territory because some of this stuff is very subjective and arbitrary. So try to work on something that actually has a measurable result. For example, to decrease the bounce rate on a page, to increase conversion, to increase open rates on an email campaign.
That's where the success metrics come into play, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Stay away from the soft, fluffy stuff, guys. You run into a lot of problems there.
All right. Francesca asks, how likely are clients willing to entertain value-based pricing if you're just starting out, if you're a freelancer?
It doesn't matter. Because the first time you buy an airline ticket is the first time you participate in value-based pricing, period. You don't need to be indoctrinated in this concept at all. You just have to realize, and the reason why I gave you 3 examples of value-based pricing, because it's a hard one to process, and you understand this, right? You understand that you pay different prices for the same thing. And it's really weird how we function that way. Just like it was said in the subjective theory value, I think, that each person looks at something and sees a different value to it. For example, here's a classic one. When you go and buy fashion clothing, the price on the rack, some people are buying, they don't care because they don't have time to shop, to cross compare. They just want what they want and they have a lot of money and they'll buy it 100% of the retail price. There's some other people who are going to wait for a 30% sale. Some people are going to wait for it to wind up in those resellers like Ross or Marshalls or Gilt, or when they have overstock, then they sell them at a pretty steep discount. Each person's buying in a different way. So when you buy it in one of those overstock sites, you're running the risk of it not fitting or not being exactly what you want. The material is different, the finish is different. And so you run the risk of waiting for it, and you have time to wait for it, and you can delay the instant gratification. So you can see there, each person wants to buy it at a different price point, and the retailer knows that. They survive on the people who buy it at full retail price, and when they can't sell it, they go through stages of discounting. So for me personally, when it comes to fashion, I almost make it a rule I would never pay full retail ever again. There are too many options for me. I don't need it that bad. Coming from a guy whose closets like rivals my wife's closet, so I'm just just being honest there.
I think a good example of this that I've encountered recently of value-based pricing is with digital advertising companies. So I don't know if any of you guys run digital ad companies, but one of the first questions that you're asked when you're engaging with these companies in the beginning is, what's your customer lifetime value? And they use that in order to figure out how much they're going to charge you for each customer acquisition. So if our customer lifetime value is $200, would we pay $50 to acquire a customer? Well, any sane business person would say yes, because it's like taking $1 and then receiving $4. Mm-hmm. And so, that value has been set, and we pay a percentage of that. That's really transactional and really direct, but that's kind of something that I've experienced recently. Would a client really agree to pay a high amount 3 years before the desired state has been achieved?
Yes. Have you had evidence to the contrary? The whole beautiful thing is all of this stuff is a tool to anchor. You guys do understand this, right? That all this conversation is to help them realize what's at stake and how much they have to gain. And a really big number starts to appear. So when I did that math with Pam, the number wound up to be $370,000. The reason why the resistance to saying yes to 74 or even 36 or 37 or $20,000 because instantly she saw the value right away. Imagine if you didn't have any of this conversation, that you just started talking to them, oh, you need a new website or a sales funnel. I'm going to charge you $20,000. And she's going to give you the one finger salute. She's going to say, no, thank you very much. That's just too much money because you haven't done this in the proper way. Okay. Everything we've been teaching you now from module 1 through 5 was to set you up for this moment to hit the ball out of the park. That's what this is for, guys. To stay in a diagnostic mindset, to understand that you're worth it and that the clients almost have to prove themselves to you, to retreat and see if they follow. Except for when they say yes, Marvin. Except for when they say yes, here's the money. Don't say like, oh, no, please bid other people. That's not the way you do that. When somebody says yes, you say, thank you very much, here's the invoice. Homework. Determine your break-even point using a provided spreadsheet. Ben Burns is going to unleash you on this because you need to know what your break-even point is. And I need to finish this part, but we also have another spreadsheet to help you figure out your minimum level engagement based on your projected goals. So this is perfect for Pam, who wants to make $200,000, what she's going to have to do per job to get there. What I want you to do is to take these bid forms that we're supplying to you and start to tailor them for your specific needs. If you're in web-based, do that. If you're a developer, if you're a videographer or a motion graphics person, then the bid form is really close to what you need already.
Okay, guys, I think this is recording. I hope this works. This is Ben Burns. I'm going to take you through just this quick kind of financial calculator that I put together. Just a note, I actually used this financial calculator when I was running my own business. So it's got a lot of different formula embedded in here. You can take it or leave it. This is really, this makes sense to me. It's something that I used, and I just wanted to pass it on because it's really helpful to figure out all of the minimums that you need. So your minimum engagement level, your minimum gross revenue, the minimum that you need to bring in every month to make ends meet, the bare minimum that you need to save for taxes, all of these things, including your burn rate. So let's go through it. Okay, so you're going to click the link below. It's going to be somewhere below the video here, and you'll get to this page. In order to basically have something to edit, you're going to go up here to File and click File and make a copy. So we'll just make a copy of Business Finances, click OK. So what that's going to do is it's going to copy everything over to your own Google account. If you don't have a Google account, you can always download it as a CSV. I recommend sticking with Google because all the formatting will remain the same. So the first thing is anything that's in a green cell, you can edit. Anything that is in a red cell is a formula and you probably shouldn't. Although if you know what you're doing, you can do whatever you want because it's your file now. The first step that we have here is all about personal expenses. Now, a lot of you, especially those of you who have, big businesses and are running, multi-million-dollar business, you probably don't need this. But for me, at this point, I needed it. So basically what you want to do here is you want to just outline what personal expenses you have every single month, because that's going to be important. This spreadsheet assumes that you don't take a traditional salary, that the money that comes in from the business, it's kind of passed through to you. So when you get paid, it's basically a member withdrawal out of the business bank account. Okay, so personal expenses here. It's pretty self-explanatory. You've got home expenses, personal, insurance, health, discretionary. Just do your best to kind of estimate all of these. What this sheet is going to do is it's going to give you a total here. And you can see that right here I have $3,000 for rent and mortgage. And it's basically adding up all the red cells and giving you the total here. So once you've done this, you can move on to step 2. Now, if you're not interested in using this to help you out with your personal finances, you can just zero this out. And I'll do that by doing this here. Boom. Now it's zeroed out. It does the quick math. And if you notice on this second sheet, the personal expenses is now 0. Now, if you just want to be able to bring home X amount of dollars per month, you can just enter that total in here. So you can completely skip personal expenses if you so desire. So we'll go ahead and put, let's say I want to make $20,000 a month. That sounds great. So my total take home right there is $20K. And this is the money that's after saving for taxes, after all my business expenses. This is just profit that I want to bring home on a monthly basis. All of these totals are going to be monthly. So then we move on to fixed business expenses. Fixed business expenses are things that you pay for every single month that are predictable. So obviously rent and mortgage, it's going to be predictable every single month. Same thing with electricity, water, sewer, trash, a lot of your utilities for the actual business. Now, if you don't have these kinds of expenses, that's okay. We're really just looking for things that you pay out of the business account as business expenses. So down here, when we talk about employees, these are everybody that you pay through a payroll system. You should have a monthly total every single month for your employees. So let's say we've got, 4 guys, and our payroll is $20K per month. For some reason, I'm liking $20K right now. So we've got a $5,000 rent bill, and maybe we have $200 for utilities. General liability insurance, that's probably $100. And maybe we do beer Fridays every week. So $100. All right, so right now it's looking like we have $25,400 in total business expenses per month. Okay. All right, so then we move over to variable expenses. Now, this is basically the percentage of an average job which goes towards expenses that depend on the job's output. So if you're hiring a whole bunch of freelancers, you'll know what percentage of the job is spent on the freelancers. So we know for an average blind job, our average cost is going to be 30%. So that means for every dollar that we charge the client, at least 30 cents of that is going to go to freelance labor. So we put 30% here. So this number is a percentage of the job that gets spent on variable expenses. Now, your normal, full-time employees are not going to be covered under this cost percentage, which is why they're in the fixed business expenses, because this is predictable. It's every month. And, no matter how many jobs come in, you still have this many people. Okay? So this is the percentage. So once we have these three columns filled out, this is where it gets really, really fun. So we'll go to step 3, the results. So based on what we've entered, and we can actually add some other stuff in here. Let's say we have, I think we had a team of 4, and we work about 40 hours a week. And I like to save, on a conservative, 30% of my gross revenue for taxes. So once you have all these, fields filled out, you'll start to see the red areas really come to life. So right here, we've got our total profit or take home is $20,000. Remember that number comes from this sheet here with the additional profit, 20K. Total business expenses, that's 25.4. That number comes from right here. And the total output, which is these two combined, is 45. So based on this number, we're going to want to save about 8K per month for taxes. And that's really important. I know I've been burned by the tax man before, and it's better to save up front. So what we have here is our gross revenue, the minimum we need to bring in every month in order to take home $20,000 a month is $64,857.14. So that's minimum per month. And our gross revenue for the year needs to be minimum $778,285. So it calculates the minimum you need to bring in order to support these numbers based on your personal expenses, your business expenses, and your cost margin. So right here, this is a great one, minimum level of engagement. So the minimum level of engagement, according to Blair Enns, is the minimum amount that you need to bring in per client per year, or I should say per project per year. And the math is really simple. It's basically your gross revenue divided by 10. Because, you can basically only take on 10 clients per year and do them the right way. So that automatically calculates there. So what's interesting here is the burn rate. So the burn rate is how much cash you expend at any certain time. And so we know that our weekly burn rate, because we have an output of $45,000 a month, with us taking home 20K, our weekly burn rate is about 13,000. We can break that down to the day, which is 2,600. Break that down to the hour, which is 337. Or per team member per hour, it's about $84. So that means if your team members aren't working on at least $85 per hour, you're losing money on them. So it's a really helpful way to calculate things. All right, so let's go ahead and make this a little bit more reasonable. Let's say our total personal expenses are about $5K a month. All right, and maybe we have one employee, and his salary is $4,000 per month. And we have a reasonable office. All right, so we just reduced the numbers a little bit to make them a little bit more palatable. And let's say we don't outsource anything. So maybe our cost is just about the cost to process a credit card at 3%. So let's take a look. So this means we need to bring in about $10,600 every single month, or that's our output. And we need to save about $2,000 per month for taxes. Our gross revenue minimum per month is $10,000, and the yearly target is $131, so not bad. Minimum level of engagement in this case is $13,000, and our burn rate boils down to, if we had a team of 2, about $80 an hour or $40 an hour per team member. So you can start to see where your hourly rates can be based on. You know, you want to like double or triple your burn rate because this is the break-even point. But that's a good way to calculate your hourly rates. Okay, so let's move over to column 3. This is kind of a cool one. This is what's called the next worry date. This comes from Mike Janda's book, Burn Your Portfolio. And this is a formula that he used to basically calculate when he needs to worry next based on how much cash he had in the business, how many billings, all this kind of stuff. Because otherwise, if you're like me, your finances will keep you up at night. So let's say today's date is May 29th. So we'll go 5/29/18. Remember, you can edit anything in the green. Total cash. How much cash do you have in your business accounts? And let's say that we've got maybe 15,000. So this is cash in the bank, right? 15,000. Total receivables. So receivables is the amount of invoices that you have out that clients have not paid yet. So let's say we're in really, really good shape and we've only got about 10,000 out that are waiting to be paid. All right, and then billings this month. So for the remainder of this month, how much are you expecting to invoice? So where this column, receivables, is how many you've already invoiced that haven't paid yet. Billings is how much money you're planning on invoicing in the remainder of this month. And since it's the 29th, maybe we've got a little $1,000 overage to bill. But we also know we've got a couple of clients scheduled for next month, and it's about $30,000 in billings. All right, so knowing that we have to save $2,000 a month for taxes, let's say we've got, maybe $6,000 for taxes, and we're risking everything and only putting aside $2,000 for an emergency fund. Now what this is going to do is the tax money in the emergency fund figures kind of deduct the cash from your business accounts. This is saying, we can't use this to operate the business because this money is set aside for something else. If you don't have tax money set aside or you don't have an emergency fund, you can zero these out and it'll be fine. So let's say we're really risking things. We've only saved about $4,000 for taxes. And we've got, actually, which wouldn't be bad now that I think about it, because quarterly taxes were just due. Anyways, $4,000 for taxes, nothing in the tank for an emergency fund. So this means our total cash flow in the next couple months is $52,000. Our monthly overhead is this, $12,742. And that means we have cash flow coverage for about 4 months. So assuming everything goes well and assuming all the invoices are paid and all of the billings that are under contract over the next month and a half come through, it means we've got 4 months in cash flow coverage, and our next worry date is August 29th. So this is a fantastic way to just, every single month, you just kind of run these numbers, run this check, and then you'll always have that next worry date in mind. Now, I used to mark this date on the calendar and just kind of move it out as things improved or got worse. So it's just kind of that handy formula that kind of helps put your mind at ease. Okay, so that's about it. I just wanted to like give you guys this kind of simple breakdown of basic financial plannings. A lot of this stuff has to do with minimums, where Chris Doe's spreadsheets will deal with goals and setting them. So if you guys found this helpful, let me know. I'll see you in the group. Okay.